Hi everybody and welcome back to my channel. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining me in this little corner of the internet. I really appreciate you being here. So in today's video, I want to talk about applying to psychology graduate roles, and I'm going to go through tips of how to approach and how to write the supporting information in a way that will hopefully really start getting you those interviews. The structure of everything that I'm going to talk about in this video, I think, is relevant to quite a lot of different graduate roles. So whether that's assistant psychologist, PWP, app, or even research roles. And I say this because it's a structure which once I started using for a variety of different roles, I started getting offered those interviews. And not only me, but a couple of my friends who don't even work in the psychology field, but they work in the field of academia in different disciplines, they started using this structure and also started getting offered interviews. Just a little disclaimer, this structure isn't something that I've got from like some other professional work guru kind of person. This is just a way of approaching the application which I found worked from doing my own kind of research and trying different things. So I'm just going to take you through what worked for me to hopefully give you some really good ideas of how to approach the applications yourselves. So just to start off, I think it's important that we go into writing an application really thinking about what they are looking for. So first off, they're looking for somebody who is interested in working in that service or with that client group. Now, it doesn't have to necessarily be your passion, but it's important that you convey in your application that working in this service or with this client group is something that you're interested in, is something that's going to excite you in some way. Secondly, they're looking for somebody who has already developed some transferable skills that are going to really help them to be able to fit into this role and do the role to the best of their ability. Thirdly, they're looking for somebody that is worth their investment. So they're going to be putting money into you, whether that's with your salary or with the training year, etc. So they want to know that you want to be working in that service, that you want to be working within the NHS long term, etc. Now, with this, I think it's important to note that, if your goal is, for example, to become a clinical psychologist and you're applying to AP roles, that's something that's okay to share and that will be appreciated. However, if you're applying to PWP roles, for example, or any kind of role that requires that training year, then saying that you want to become a clinical psychologist is probably going to put them off. And I know that sounds a bit weird, but basically they want people that want to stick around in the service for a couple of years after the training, because that's how they're going to get the most benefit off their money. So even if you don't really want to do that, you're going to have to make sure that it looks like you want to do that in your application. So either you can say, keep your goals of your future quite broad, but like related to the kind of work that service does. Or you could say, I want to become a senior PWP, or I want to eventually become a high intensity therapist. Something that is much more in line with that service so that investment is really going to pay off for them. So how do we even kind of approach the application? Where do we start? So I think the best thing to do to start off with is to get the person spec, which you should be able to find in the job ad, and go through each of the points in that person spec. And basically when you go through it, you just want to try and think where you've developed that skill. What role were you in when you developed that skill? What exactly in that role helped you develop that skill? And just make little bullet points on as many of the things in the person spec as you can, because that's going to be the basis of what you end up writing your application about. So best place to start is just to go and write that kind of bullet point or annotate the person spec, really thinking about where you've developed that skill and how. Quite a nice thing is that a lot of the things on the person specs for all of these kind of psychology graduate roles, well, the clinical roles, and I guess if you're interested in research, then a lot of the research roles as well, but a lot of them are going to have very similar things on their person specs. Now, some of them will be different. So do make sure that you check the person spec for every single job and do this every time. But once you've done it once or twice, you're probably going to have a lot of information, have a really good idea already of where you've developed those skills. So this step isn't necessarily so important once you've done it a couple of times. Now that we've done that, we are kind of ready to start actually writing the application or drafting the application. When you do this, just remember to try and be concise. They have a lot of applications that they need to read through. So if your supporting information is more than like 1,000 words, then that's going to be a lot for them to read through, and they might not be very engaged in what you're saying. So try to keep it as concise as possible. I'd say probably between like 600 to 900 words is kind of a good range. Like, try and stay kind of in the middle of that. Obviously, it depends on what you actually need to say, but yeah, try and keep it as concise as possible and really clear and to the point. If you're struggling to get going, that's okay. Writing things is hard, yeah? So don't approach the first draft like you need to be writing everything perfectly in perfect full sentences. You know, to get going, just try and bullet point the kinds of things that you want to include in each paragraph. And then from there, you'll be able to create nice sentences that sound good. But actually starting writing is a really hard process. So if you're struggling, just bullet point the points in each paragraph and you can build up from there. Another thing to think about when drafting up your application is to just have a think about what points in the person spec are clearly demonstrated in other parts of the application. So, for example, your qualifications, what universities you've gone to, that kind of thing is all going to be in other parts of the application. And so you don't necessarily need to put them in a supporting statement, and you can probably save yourself quite a few words by cutting those things out. So yeah, just have a really good think about what you really need to demonstrate with this section. Also, just bear in mind that some job adverts might specify like a word limit that they want from you for the supporting information. So keep your eye out for that. And some even have like specific questions or a structure that they want you to keep in mind when writing the supporting information. So if they do have questions, make sure you answer all of those questions. And yeah, just really make sure that you are playing to what they want if they specify anything that they want to know from you. So now let's talk about the opening paragraph. This is the bit where you kind of catch their attention and draw them in. So a lot of people make the mistake, and I definitely did in my early applications, which is where I wasn't getting interviews, of kind of starting off the first paragraph about them. Something which I was using in my early applications was, I'm a motivated and passionate MSc health psychology graduate with a merit from University College London. That stuff doesn't need to be there, and it's not the kind of thing that's going to draw them in, and it's probably something that they read quite a lot in a lot of people's applications. So remember, that kind of way of starting it isn't necessary. They know that information from another place in your application. Instead, I found that the best thing to do is to dedicate the first paragraph to really highlighting why you want to be working in that service or with that client group. Show them why you're enthusiastic about it, why you're excited about it, and try and draw on some of your personal or professional experiences to kind of back up why you might be interested in this field. So an example of how I started my opening paragraph in some of my more successful applications is, there are two main reasons why I want to apply to this position. First, I have a long-standing passion for mental health with an ultimate goal of carrying a caseload directly treating clients. I'm excited by the possibility of using simple techniques to create individualized pathways to enable patients to lead on their own journey to recovery. Secondly, I respect IAP and its mission to deliver therapies to an entire population. So as you can see, compared to the first example, that's going to draw you in much more. That really shows a kind of passion for working in this area or within this service that is much more exciting for the employer than the first way of doing it. Some tips that I have for figuring out what to put in that first paragraph is have a look at the service kind of goals or values or the trust values, And you can try and kind of draw those in as, things that you're excited about or passionate about. Another thing which I found quite helpful to do is to have a little bit of a Google about what other people are saying about working with this client group, just to give you some ideas. If you're not really sure of what to say, then having a look online and really seeing what kind of work people do and what they're saying about it can help you to form something engaging and nice to say. Again though, keep this paragraph concise. In my successful applications, this paragraph was about 3 or 4 sentences, relatively long sentences, but 3 or 4 sentences that really demonstrated my passion for this service, how that passion came about, etc. In this first paragraph, you could also link in your future goals. For example, I have the goal of wanting to become a clinical psychologist. Or as you could see from the example that I just gave, I kept the goal quite brief. I have the goal of wanting to create individualized pathways through having my own caseload. So we've opened up with an engaging paragraph about why you want to work for that service. So now let's get into the details of how to structure the rest of your application. So in my earlier applications, it was kind of a bit of a mess. There wasn't necessarily a nice flow to the next paragraphs. I was just trying to kind of demonstrate how I met all the different person spec points, but there wasn't really any real kind of story or narrative to it that felt like it made sense. To overcome this, I found it really useful to have the next paragraph as my most relevant experience to that role, and then the paragraph after that as the next most relevant experience for the role, and keep going like that until you feel like you've covered all of the points that you can or need to cover in the person spec. So as you're writing each paragraph and explaining kind of what things you've done and what you've learned, try to bring in as many things from the person spec as possible. And if possible, try to link some things from the person spec as well. I found it really useful to actually use some of the wording from the person spec so that it was really clear what I was trying to demonstrate in these points. So an example of how I started one of the paragraphs in a previous successful application is I've gained experience working with people with mental health difficulties through volunteering as a peer support worker within Solent Mind. I then went on to briefly explain kind of what I did in this role, what I'd learned from this, and linking it into the person spec as I went. Another useful thing to do is to try and have a sentence that links specifically back into the role that you're applying for. Make it clear why the skill that you've developed is useful for that role. And you can use the person spec to give you ideas of what kind of things you might be able to link back to for this section. For example, in one of my applications, one of my sentences was, I feel confident conducting professional and emotionally charged telephone contacts. With all of these things, it's basically the way you pitch it and the language that you use that is the most important thing. So, for example, in my role, I did this, which meant I learned these things, and therefore I feel confident / able to do this. So it's really clear what you did, what you learned, and how that's related to the role. If you haven't been able to cover every single point in the person spec, that's fine. Just do as many as possible, making it as clear as possible, or as long as you can demonstrate that you've got most of the skills that are relevant to that role, then it's probably going to be okay. And as I said previously, go from the most relevant experience, then the next most relevant, then the next most relevant, until you've covered as many points as you feel like you can. Finally, the ending of your personal statement doesn't necessarily need to include much. For mine, I literally just wrote a couple of sentences reiterating that I'm excited by the possibility of working in this service and that I look forward to hearing from them soon. So once you've finished the draft of your write-up of the application, have a read through and see if you can make anything more concise. Is there any way that you can put things together, cut words out, etc., but without taking out any of the necessary detail? Make sure you check for spelling and grammar mistakes and maybe get somebody else to read over it just for a second pair of eyes to really look for those possible mistakes. You'd be surprised at how many people actually have mistakes in their applications. If there are certain questions that they want you to answer, make sure that you answer all of them. You know, there's a reason that they're asking those questions. They want to know that specific bit of information. And if you're applying to more than one role, make sure that you adapt your application to sound as relevant to that role as possible. You know, you can work off of the draft that you've used for a previous application, but some of the things in the intro paragraph are probably going to need to be changed. Some of the things and how you relate back to the role in the rest of the application are probably going to have to be changed. So really make sure that each and every application is specific to that service. Finally, I just want to say a massive good luck if you are sending off applications. I know that this period, especially if you're trying to get your first clinical role, is really difficult. It's not easy. There's a lot of competition, but I promise you, you will get there. You just need to keep trying, keep adapting your application bit by bit, and in the end, I promise you, it will work out. I think I sent off over 20 applications before I even started getting offered interviews, so hang in there. I promise it'll be okay. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below and I'll answer them as best I can. If you liked it, give it a like, subscribe if you want to see more of my videos. And yeah, I hope that you have a lovely week. Take care. Bye.